Hey guys, welcome back to Magic TV. My name's Craig. It's 9 o'clock. It's a Saturday, which means it's time for a Talk Magic. And have I got something special in the store for you today? I am going to be interviewing an incredibly successful performer. This is somebody who has been for the last 14 years performing at the Edinburgh Fringe, which a lot of people only dream of doing. This is somebody who has created and released their own magic with huge production companies, worked with some of the biggest names in the industry, and has kind of been there and bought the t-shirt. And there's a chance that you might not have heard of this person before. And I'm very excited about doing this interview because a lot of the time when I interview somebody, I know all about them, I know all about their career, and I kind of can guess the answers to the questions that I'm going to be asking. But in this case, I know literally zip about this person, other than I've very quickly become a big fan. So we're going to find out an awful lot more about them together. He is a performer, a creator. He is an incredibly nice guy from the short period of time I've already got to know him. I am, of course, talking about Dave Anik. How you doing, Dave? You okay?
I'm great. Thanks so much for letting me talk to you. Sorry, I just opened a flask and didn't realize the steam. Oh, I should have made that like an effect.
That would have been
Oh
amazing. It
yeah,
would have
this
been
is
like a
me.
smoke
That would have been
chamber
so
wall,
good.
isn't it? That would have
People be
been
like, when you're
amazing.
releasing that.
That's so cool. But yeah, welcome to Talk Magic. Welcome to Magic TV. Thank you so much for jumping on the channel. I really appreciate it. Um,
Me too, man.
and everything that I said is true. I mean, before we get into everything, you have been performing at the Edinburgh Fringe for the last 14 years. I mean, I was speaking to people at Blackpool this year, and I was asking them, "What's your goal?" And the goal was, well, one day I want to get a Fringe show. One day I want to go to the Fringe. And there's you, been doing it for the last 14 years, and that's just there on its own. Take everything else away. That's an incredible accomplishment.
Appreciate that. It's been a sort of staple of my financial, um, it's the staple of my income for the last, 14 years, really. Pretty much from the first time I did it, I was like, oh, I need to do this again, and just kept going with it.
Oh well, when we will talk about the Fringe if you don't mind, and that's kind of interesting because I've never done the Edinburgh Fringe. I did the Brighton Fringe,
Hmm.
but never done the Edinburgh Fringe. But one thing that I've been told by many people that do the Edinburgh Fringe is you've got to go expecting to lose a lot of money. Don't look at it as a commercial endeavor. And yet here you are saying, well, it's a big part of my financial planning for the year doing that show. That's very different to what a lot of other people say to me. So it'll be very interesting to talk about that at some
Sure.
point in the interview, if that's okay. Um, but before we do any of that, let's give people a frame of reference and let's find out a little bit more about you and how you got into magic. So, tell me, David, what is your origin story? Um,
Love
I,
that. Love that.
honestly, well, yeah, I mean, honestly, I hope I'm not coming across rude in any way. You look very young. You don't even look like you're older than you've been for 14 years. Like, I mean, you must have a
Sure.
very youthful face. That's
I
what.
have. I've always been cursed or blessed with youth. I think the older I get, the more it's a blessing. The younger you are, it was definitely a curse, you
Hmm.
know?
Hmm.
Yeah, so my earliest memories involve performing magic in primary school on Toy Day. I took a magic set into school. I can't remember a time when magic didn't exist in my life. I went to drama school, the Liverpool Institute of Performing Arts, to study acting. The day after we graduated, I was on a train to the Edinburgh Fringe Festival to do 10 minutes in my sort of best friend show. They were doing musical comedy, sort of a double act, and I was just doing 10 minutes. And I did that every day for the full run, 23 days. I wasn't getting paid. We were just doing like accommodation and travel. But I was like, okay, this is probably going to be the rest of my life. And I paid attention to the business side of things, how it was done. Went up the year after that. So that was about 2010. I went up the year after that, 2011, with my first on my own show, solo show, and then continue doing that every year since. These days, I do about 3 shows a day when I'm at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, all different shows, hour long, me on stage, different kinds of show. I did a lot of, I was living in Liverpool. I did a lot of close up magic, restaurants, bars, weddings, some corporate stuff. I came up around the same time as like Lewis Laval. I was hanging out a lot there was a little magic shop that was right next to Lewis's mum's shop where she sold like sweets and stuff. And so I was hanging out with him
Yeah.
and Ben, who now runs the Oracle Bar in Liverpool, which I performed at for the first time about 2 weeks ago, actually. So that was kind of the crowd I was hanging with. But and I enjoyed doing the close up, and it was good. And you know, I used to do, man, like I think the most I was doing at a given time was I was doing Red Hot World Buffet restaurant from like midday till 4 o'clock on a Saturday, and then I would get on a train and go to the Red Hot World Buffet in Manchester, and then perform from 6 till 10 p.m. there, and then the do it again on Sunday. And like after a while, I was like, this is killing me. And I just one day I didn't walk in, I quit, and then I started doing magic on the street. And then some guy from Liverpool Football Club television channel said, "Hey, do you want to do a TV show?" So I did something with them. So I've been lucky, you know. I think it's because I'm always I'm trying to do stuff. But in regards to the shows I've done at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, I did very commercial sort of comedy magic for a very long time, and I was mainly doing comedy clubs when I was living in Liverpool. I did stuff with like Hot Water Comedy Club when they very first started, and they were just in this sort of dingy nightclub, and I was hanging out with all comedians there. And that was I pretty much hung out with comedians. Like I never really socialized with magicians until kind of like the last 2 or 3 years, 3 or 4 years maybe, except at Edinburgh. And at Edinburgh, like I say, I was doing very commercial sort of magic comedy shows. But then I think, I discovered Bo Burnham, and I started doing shows that had a bit more narrative, using more of the acting background. And I've been a writer sort of as long as I can remember, never professionally for a long time, but, just kind of as a hobby. And then over the last few years, sort of just before COVID, I started doing shows that were heavy, spooky narratives. So I did a show called Nightmare Magic for 3 years. Then I did The Mystery of Dracula, which we've been doing for 3 years. Then a version of Charles Dickens' The Signalman for the last couple of years. And then the newest one was called The Haunted House. And we just did 7 dates in the theatre in Sheffield. We sold that out, which was awesome. And so I toured those shows in theatres. And those are sort of, 50, 60, 70% narrative theatre, play, storytelling, the rest magic. That's kind of the USP in the shows. And because I found theatres were a lot more interested in a concept idea, like a show called The Haunted House versus David Anik, who no one's heard of, or Bog Standard Magician, who no one's heard of. They don't really book magicians, but they will book the stuff I'm doing that's more narratively theatrical. So that's where I am now. And as it happens, I'm about to go back into close-up magic, which I haven't done in a very long time. I've been pretty much exclusively theatre for a long time now. But I'm interested. I'm interested in it commercially, and I'm very interested to see if I can take the stuff that I do in theatre, that kind of brand that I built for myself, which you'd probably call bizarre magic, really, although I don't think it necessarily looks like what people think of when they think of bizarre magic, but that's probably the best definition of it in the magic parlance, to close up. And that's why I did the Oracle Bar recently in Liverpool, doing close up there, because I was just going, hey, like, can I find a way to do what I'm doing now, but at a table, So that's my villain origin story.
That's really kind of interesting. There's a lot we touched on there. I'm going to delve deeper into some of those areas, if that's okay.
Sure.
Because we're
yeah,
all over the and I'm really interested to delve deeper into it. So, remind me again, when did you first start doing magic? At what age was it that you first started doing it as a hobby?
I can't remember. I was doing it my earliest memories involve showing magic tricks to my grandparents, and that has just been a permanent feature throughout my whole life. Like I remember being a very, very young child, like learning tricks from. It must have been at least at a certain point when I could read, because I was learning tricks from magic books and showing them to my granddad while he was sitting down in his chair. And I can't remember, honestly.
Okay. You tend to, but you've been doing it since a child, obviously. You tend to find
Yeah.
that a lot of people that were doing magic from a very young age started performing when they were in school or they were teenagers or something.
Oh yeah.
Did you
school talent show
when you were like really young? And if you did, was the goal to become a full-time pro? Was the goal to become a performer, a magician, or was this just like a fun hobby that you had?
Great question. You ask good questions. You're good at your job, Craig.
Thank you.
I think like I what I've definitely been interested in a lot of things, business and artistically, over the course of my life. And at various points in my younger years, and I'm including like my early 20s in this, but all the way up to my early 20s, I've wanted to do a lot of different things. So when I was very young, I wanted to be a paleontologist, even while I was doing magic tricks. You know what I mean? That was very much a hobby throughout sort of primary school and definitely secondary school. I did the school talent show with magic, but when I was 14, I started taking drama at school. Like that was a GCSE that I could take in my school. And I was taking that really seriously. I was like, oh, I think I found the thing that I want to do for the rest of my life. So I was pursuing the idea of being an actor very seriously. And then obviously went to drama school to study acting. And I got an agent when I left drama school and did a few auditions, but I very quickly realized that I didn't like the idea of the common journey for an actor was get an agent, do auditions. But it felt very much like the majority of that process was out of my hands. And I like to be in control of what I'm doing. And so while I lived in Liverpool, I had loads of little like sort of businesses popped up. We were doing like Nerf gun battles at one point, lots of different improvisation. I was part of a lot of different improv groups. I did sketch comedy for a while. We took a sketch comedy show to the Edinburgh Fringe Festival. So eventually most of it was performative in some sense. Even the things that weren't performative involved me being, a sort of creative figurehead in some way. You know what I mean? And I wanted to be a stand-up comedian for a very long time. Like I was taking stand-up pretty seriously. But I think at a certain point, and I couldn't really pinpoint where it is, but it was definitely within the last decade or so, probably about 10 years ago. I'm 36, just for context. So around sort of like my mid to late 20s, I think, and it probably, corresponded with when I met the person who would now become my wife, going, oh, I think I should sit down and, make some money instead of like just having a lot of erratic ideas. And it made the most sense that I focused on magic. And even what I was doing with magic was, up for debate. Like, was I going to stick purely to the close-up? Was I going to stick entirely to Edinburgh? You know what I mean? And it's only over the last, like I say, sort of just about sort of the back end of 2018 that I realized, it's this theatre magic that I'm interested in, or like this genre of magic. So I'd say in regards to like, have I always wanted to be a magician? The answer is no. Have I always been doing magic? Yes.
Okay, that's a great answer. Follow-up question. In the period of time from leaving school to making that decision, hey, right, okay, it's magic that I want to do. When you were kind of bouncing around, you were an actor, you were improv, you were stand-up comedy. Did magic take sort of a back burner at that point? Was it kind of like, I'm going to focus on these other things? So it became very much kind of a thing that you do, but it's not what defines you. And follow-up question to that, do you think that all of those experiences in stand-up comedy and improv and so on and so forth has made you a better magician? Because a lot of people, their approach towards becoming a professional magician is buy some tricks, go out and give it a go. But you've got a solid grounding in a lot of other aspects. Has that helped you as a career, in your career as a magician?
Sure, I'll answer that sort of backwards. So in my own experience, I think it's incredibly rare for any creative individual. And I think, creative can, even branch out to science, really, if we're talking about new ideas. But, any kind of like media, art, anything like that. It's incredibly rare in my experience to find someone who is very successful at that. And I measure success, let's say ability to, do it for a living. Let's whatever your standard of living might be, call it that, by doing one very, very specific thing their whole life. Mostly, I think it becomes an amalgamation of a wide skill set that you need to have. Like, it was one thing for me to be mechanically competent at performing magic. It's a totally different thing to be able to stand on stage and make people look at me and care and want to listen to me keep talking. And engage, fundamentally engage, and learn scripts and learn how to perform a script as though it's the first time I've ever said it, which is a skill comedians and actors have to have, right? And magicians too. I think it's just because, I think truthfully, a wider answer to this question, and I am a little bit assuming as to where the question's coming from, is that because the vast majority of people who perform magic professionally tend to perform magic in a close-up environment, close-up magic is kind of unusual, like in almost all other art forms. It's rare that you get other forms of entertainment that can, and this is something I've obviously been thinking about a lot recently due to the fact that I'm considering close-up magic again. It's very rare that you get a form of entertainment that integrates into, an event in the way close-up magic can. You can be there with the guests on the ground, You don't need any special lighting. They don't all have to look at me at the same time. You know what I mean? I can perform to individual groups, right? Because of that, I think a lot of the natural theatrical skills that magicians certainly would have expected to be masters of 50 to 100 years ago, which I appreciate is a big leap, but, you know, I mean, most of theatre acting and stuff kind of has been fairly similar within the last 50 to 100 years, with the exception of sort of televisual acting. Mostly, same with comedy, like those skills have been, you know, relatively stable. Whereas magic's kind of moved into the market. Whereas like, do you know what I mean? More than
Yeah.
people have come to the market of magic. So the market of like theatrical magic is much smaller than it used to be, obviously. Given that, I think the natural skills that would have been essential for most magicians to learn because they were performing on stage mostly have died out. Undoubtedly, it's my greatest skill and my best asset. The compliment I am given, and I honestly, I feel incredibly confident saying this without it feeling like an ego trip by any stretch. The vast majority of things people say to me after they see me perform, whether it's close up, whether it's on stage, in any context, is, man, you're really confident. You look really comfortable in the space you're in, which is quite a strange thing to say. But man, it's mind blowing how much I hear that. And it's entirely because I've been doing it since, you know, I've been doing drama. I've been taking acting seriously since I was 14, which is an advantage I honestly didn't realize I had until I started talking to some other magicians who are successful. But, you know, if they say to me something like, you know, if we start having a conversation about how they are as performers, and I'm like, oh, you know, you'd think about it like this, and they don't have a frame of reference from where I'm coming from because they've never studied theatre. No disrespect to them. It's just, it's interesting to me. I'm realizing now a lot of magicians haven't had what I've had. I think I'm very privileged in that angle.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if that answered your question, mate. Sorry.
No, it did. No, it did. It was brilliant. It was a great answer. Absolutely perfect. Exactly what I was looking for.
Good.
So another question. You know, we've only been chatting for half an hour, but I can tell already that you're somebody who takes the business side of magic very seriously. So when you had that epiphany in your early 20s and you were like, you know what, I need to start making money at this thing now.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of people would look at that as a crazy, I want to make money. I'm going to be a magician. Because a lot of people, they kind of go, you know, it's that old joke, isn't it? What's the difference between a magician and a pizza? A pizza can feed a family of four. And you've been very, very successful as a magician. Now, was that so if I'm correct in assuming that you take the business side of things very seriously, which I think you do, was that something that at that point you thought, you know what, I'm going to have to master business? Was it something you'd already thought of? What did you do to upskill yourself? And you talked about doing a lot of close-up early on and going to world buffets and so on and so forth. Was that your first entry point, like going and doing close-up? Because it's a lot easier to get a close-up gig generally than it is to get a stage show. Or were you kind of leaning into the stage thing from the very beginning? What was the plan?
Great question. So in terms of like upskill, definitely. I was a voracious reader of business books. Like, do you know one of the best books on business? I always felt like I remember reading like the DK books, those big thick books, like that are just like these like the DK books on economics, the DK books on business. I think I'm generally a very curious person. I'm a big fan of learning. I love information. I spend a lot of time watching YouTube video essays. You know, that's like the world I live in. And so I was a big fan of self-help also as a genre, which I think is actually as vital to business as understanding businesses, because you are yourself the business, right? Like my physical body is the business. You know, I need, if I'm in an emotionally good space, that means I'm making more money, probably. So I did make a very conscious effort to try and learn about that, you know, aspect of things. And yeah, I never really, it didn't occur to me to look at sort of what magicians were releasing in regards to business. I do think that close-up magic will have been the first kind of magic I performed anyway, right? Because you're not going to get a stage. So you're performing tricks to your friends, you're performing tricks to so you understand that as a market, like really early on if you're performing magic, because it's the first thing you do, right? I was lucky, sorry, I'm just going to mute my phone. I didn't realize that I hadn't. Sorry, apologies. I had the advantage of, because I was doing drama in school from like 14, understanding that, oh, I can stand, like, you know, and I saw a lot of theatre when I was a kid. I was like, oh, that's a world that exists. So that was never a foreign concept to me. And then when I started doing the Edinburgh Fringe at sort of, you know, like 21, I'd say by that point, while I had close-up gigs, you know, like I wasn't doing a lot. Like I definitely didn't have like a residency. I probably just done the occasional thing for 50 quid, you know, maybe 100 quid. That would have been a great gig at that point. But, you know, at that point, I was still being a student. But when I came out of there, I think I was also very, very lucky. Again, like I just want to highlight this. I was living with like three other guys in the cheapest house in Liverpool. And at that time, housing benefits was much more. I honestly think like the benefit system is one of those phrases that makes everything sound like dirty and bad, but really those things at that time were stronger for people like me who were wanting to develop a business and needed financial support so that we didn't have to panic about where our next meal is coming from in order to just, and I took advantage of that, like, and so did all my friends I was living with. A lot of those things simply aren't in place now. So I do think I had an easier time with it. I'm hoping those things might come back one day. And don't get me wrong, that helped me with rent, but and you know, my dad, not at all a wealthy man, but like wasn't going to let me starve. So I had an advantage that I could relax a bit and didn't have to panic too much about making money super, super quickly. I think if I'd had a bit more of a fire at my backside, I probably would have just gotten to the space I am now faster, to be honest, because I've always had that drive to do it. But undoubtedly, close-up magic was the easiest thing. Like after a while, and these days, and I definitely could have done this back then, but this is what I would do now. If I wanted a close-up residency gig tomorrow, I'm very confident I could find one. Like I just pre-pandemic, just before the world went to like sort of exploded, I was sitting down with my good friend Aaron Jones, great magician, and we just went on Google, made a list of what are the local restaurants in our area, the local businesses, the local places we could perform, highly prioritizing places where they were not independently run, because as far as I can tell, like if they're independently run, the guy who owns the place isn't going to want to spend money. But if you are between whoever owns the place and who's in charge of the, you know, the shifts, they don't care because they're getting a fixed salary and they might have some kind of budget they can stretch to you. Those kind of places, you know, like places like Frankie and Benny's or something, like Old Red Hot World Buffet, or the Botanist or whatever, calling those places up and acting like I knew what I was talking about. Hey, my name's David Anik. I'm a big time fancy magician. You want me in your restaurants? You know, give them that spiel and get a meeting, go in, talk to them, show off a bit, like act high status, make it. I don't want to seem desperate. And I've done that a bit recently for friends, you know, and so that market is very easy as far as I'm concerned. Okay, I'm not going to say very easy to get into, but definitely way easier to access than theatrical, massively so. And the theatre has taken me a long time to build up.
That's great. Wow. And so let me ask you another question. So putting the business side of things aside for a minute, was the goal, obviously you said that you did some close-up magic when you first started, because obviously when you first kind of went full time, was the goal to transition effectively into theatrical performances as soon as possible? And was going to the Fringe a big part to make that happen? This kind of brings us full circle because we talked very early on about how, to you, the Edinburgh Fringe is a way of making a lot of money, you know, for your business, which is fantastic. A lot of other people have had very different experiences of the Fringe. So
Sure.
was your goal to go to the Fringe to make money and make it a thing that you did every year and a big part of your business plan? Or was it a case of, you know, I'm going to go, because a lot of people, they go to the Fringe to be noticed and to be discovered by somebody or whatever the case may be. Like, what was the plan in terms of, you know,
Sure.
you want to make money, you're doing some close-up, you're doing some shows. Where did the Fringe factor into this?
Sure. So I'd say pre 25 years old, to say that I ever had a plan would be a lie. Like my greatest advantage really professionally was just a fierce curiosity and a constant sense of I want to be doing things. And I never, while I could get sucked into video games, I don't think like I I don't even see it as a kind of like, oh, I'm not lazy. You know, I can definitely be lazy, but it's more I've got to I want to be doing stuff all of the time. And that put me in a position where I found myself with various opportunities, most of which I probably could have capitalized on a lot earlier or in a better way. But things like, yes, I'll do the Edinburgh Fringe, like, yes, I'll go and do these gigs all around me, like at comedy clubs or stuff like that. Every time those opportunities came, you know, or I'd chase them, or I'd be like, what comedy clubs are on tonight? You know, I remember, in fact, the reason I went up to the Edinburgh Fringe, if we go all the way back to the beginning, would be in Freshers Week in university, in the Liverpool Institute of Performing Arts, the drama school. It wasn't just actors, it was musicians, dancers, pretty much every kind of, like, lighting directors, costume, everything that gets involved in performance. It was like a fame school. It was literally built as a fame school, like by the same guy made like the British School and stuff. And they did an open mic night in Freshers for the musicians, and it was packed, like 400 students there, you know, and I was insecure as hell. And musician after musician got on stage, and they were all of a standard, because it was a performing arts school, and everyone was just chatting and stuff. And then one guy got on stage. He started singing "Everyone Shut Up" because he was singing comedy songs, and everyone joined in. No one knew who he was. He was just another student. And I watched, and I was like, "You're going to be my best friend." And I went up, and I made. Amy is still one of my closest friends to this day. And he was the one who was, I'm going to go to do the Edinburgh Fringe. So while in one sense you could look at that as lucky, but truthfully, I feel like I've made a big conscious effort to make friends throughout my entire life with people who have impressed me. And I think that has been the opening to doors. So the reason I went up to the Edinburgh Fringe was because he asked me. They were going to go and do it. They didn't have enough material in their show. And I was like, yeah, sure. The reason I kept going back was because I paid attention. And I made friends with people in Edinburgh because accommodation is incredibly expensive. But I knew if I found someone who could let me stay on their floor, that would work. And it did, because I spend my time making friends with as many people as I possibly can, like trying to be pally. Oh no! Oh no!
Don't worry,
don't worry, it's going to come back. It's going to come back. I got so excited. I got so excited.
That's
done.
absolute.
Yes, I'm back. Wow, I got so excited to kick things. So yeah, going up to the Edinburgh Fringe originally was not part of some master plan. Over time, it has developed into a successful business model for me. And so to briefly speak about the idea of people don't make money with the Edinburgh Fringe and stuff like that. So I'm not going to get like deep into exactly how I do what I do when I'm there, but I would definitely say that I'm not the only one. If you speak to the likes of Charlie Caper, he will tell you the same story I do, and he uses pretty much the same business model I do. I could list a few other magicians that you haven't heard of who are doing that. I mentioned Charlie just because I know recently he started doing lectures and stuff. Who else might be part of, I don't know, people. So I honestly think that while it is not some great conspiracy, the Edinburgh Fringe as an organization is not harmed by artists going up with the expectation of losing money, because the venues will make money, and the producers will make money, and the advertisers will make money. And those people are very, very good at business. Artists tend not to be, and will get taken advantage of quite specifically. To say the greatest outset cost of the Edinburgh Fringe is the accommodation by a massive margin, and that has only increased. The other thing is, if you do a show that is paid, that is to say people are paying tickets, you will give probably about 40% of those ticket sales, whether you sell them or not, directly to the venue, right? And let me be clear, whether you sell them or not. So if you've got 100 seats, you owe the venue 40% of what those seats would sell every day, right? So if it's 10 or a seat, you know what I mean? That's 400 quid every day. And when you know that the average size of an Edinburgh audience for a lot of people is 40%, you realize it's a bit of a racket. And so the idea of performers, and I also think, to be honest, it kind of speaks to a certain type of like attitude a lot of professionals have, which is, oh, you know, you don't go up to make money. And I'm like, well, you saying that means you've already decided to fail, like in my head, right? Because I'm not going to waste my time with that. And there are a few organizations. There's one I work with called the Free Fringe, which gives you venues for free. You cannot charge tickets. You only get donations on the way out. And immediately most people are put off by that idea, because it sounds like, oh, that sounds less of an experience or something, or like, oh, that isn't the proper Edinburgh Fringe, or nonsense like that. Mainstream comedians are starting to do that model. because they have learned that, oh, wait, all the money that gets given at the end goes in my pocket. Literally all of that money is mine. I don't have to give it to anyone. Yeah. And it's like, okay, so if I do a show that is commercial, let's just call it a big commercial magic show. Let's give it a ridiculous title like Literally the Best Magician, which was my title for 3 years. All of a sudden, I've got a room that's got 120 seats. On a bad day, I get 60. On a good day, I get 120. And I get a lot of good days because I'm good at what I do. And I spend a lot of time making the product really good. And I say at the end of the show, hey, if you had a good time on the way out, give me £10. And a lot of them do, like a huge number, and the average donation is X, you know, suddenly that's a viable business model, especially when you do 3 shows a day. So yeah, that is how I do the Edinburgh Fringe Festival. And it is like, it's that model has only been around for the last sort of 15 years, really, but people are definitely getting a wind of it. I know people are already going to be upset at everything I've already said, because there's definitely an attitude of, don't tell people this is what we're doing, you know, which is fair enough. But like, you know, it's no great scam. It's essentially, it's, you know, the Edinburgh Fringe organization really likes to give the impression that they are doing something for the artists, and you might get discovered. That is total, I'm not going to swear, nonsense. And like, I have absolutely nothing against, say, Phoebe Waller-Bridge, who's obviously one of the chairs, kind of the I can't remember what her title is, but she is the official face of the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, right? In like, there's a title for it, and part of me looks at that and goes, I don't feel like that person is necessarily an accurate experience of what the majority of people have. You know, when you have a background like she does, when you have the opportunities she had early on, I think that's a little bit unfair to say that that person was discovered. You know what I mean? Like, it's rare. Richard Gadd is probably a person who is much more justifiable, because obviously very recent success in Netflix with a big TV show. Richard Gadd was doing the Free Fringe back in 2013 in venues that I do, selling, literally doing the same business model. And then only went to the paid Fringe because the big difference is that reviewers will then turn up to your show. And obviously with comedy, you've got like the awards. Anyway, blah, blah, blah. That's the Cliff Notes.
That's amazing. And on that subject, I mean, going back every single year for 14 years, 3 shows a day, do you ever find, yeah, I know that most people that go to the Fringe every year, they try to put together a completely different show every year, because they know that people are going to be coming back and they're going to be seeing them again, and they're building up, you know, a loyal base that come and watch them every year. I'm very good friends with Tom Crosby, for example, and I see him every single year thinking, right, okay, what am I going to do this year? Elliot Bibby, another example of somebody who does every single year a different show. Do you go back with a new show every year? Is that important? And is there any pressure on you thinking, right, okay, I've got to write a whole new show now, or is that something that's not too hard?
So it's a good question. So yes and no, because I do 3 shows a day, I've got an advantage. I could do 1 show and keep it the same for about, say, 3 years in a row. Okay, and especially if it's a really good show and a really commercial show. And because I'm only doing it at the Edinburgh Fringe, say, and I'm not touring it around because it's a magic show, and it's not necessarily super convenient for theatrical tours or something. And comedy clubs, I don't find financially worth my time. People like coming back to the same show sometimes because they like to bring their friends and go, come and see this guy, I saw him last year. And they've only seen it once and there's no video of it. So I'd say you can get away with doing the same show for a while. Not forever by any stretch, but at least 3 years, probably 5 years, probably longer, actually. I've definitely got routines that I do. So these days, the way I structure it is I have 1 show that is just absolute commercial comedy magic. And that show will change, but it will have some structured routines that I tend to keep every year because they're good. They're very, very solid routines, you know? And if people want to come and see David Anik do his comedy magic, they know they can go to that show. And that show will always have a title like Comedian Magician or something like that, you know? So people know what they're getting. I have been, over the last few years, as I've mentioned, moving into a more narrative space. And those shows have been newer. Like I've, So Nightmare Magic was the first sort of big version I did of that. And although it kept the same title, undoubtedly every year I took it back, it was a very different show. The reason I kept the same title is because I could use the same marketing, honestly. And I knew no one would care because I'm not famous. You know what I mean? Like the Guardian's not going to come and go, oh, he did the same thing. No one cares. And that was constant evolving because that was like, how do I mix narrative into magic? And I'd say if I was going to go up to the Edinburgh Fringe and just do a standard magic show, I could do that. I could write once a day. I'm within the space of 48 hours. Absolutely no bother, because I've been doing it for a very, very long time. And I understand how to structure a magic show pretty damn well. When it comes to the stuff I'm doing now, which is much more heavy narrative and finding ways to mix story with magic in a way that's good. And I think there's almost no examples. I think there are, I'm literally struggling to think of a single example, to be totally honest, where I'm like, that is a good example of what I'm talking about. I'm aware that most people are aware of like Delgadio's in and of itself and stuff. And I discovered that after I did my first version of the narrative magic show, which was interesting, actually. And then Darren, in his most recent show, Showman, did a narrative element, but you could very much, I'm not going to start critiquing stuff, but I could, like, you know, that's the space that my head exists within, right? Like, I watch this stuff and I'm like, what is my version of that? So when it comes to that kind of show, that's kind of like my flagship show, my artistic new thing, I'm trying to do something new with magic show, that takes a while. That will take me months to write. But yes, I do. But I enjoy it. I thoroughly love creating. So it never feels like work. Sometimes it can be a bit hairy. I do set myself deadlines. Those deadlines will sometimes come in the form of preview shows. I know I'm doing a show in 3 months. I've got to have something I'm going to do on stage, and I have no intent. Like, and the show will have some mad title, like The Haunted House. I can't go up and do a rope routine. You know what I mean? Like, I can't go and do SpongeBob in that show. I need to do something that feels like the show is valid at the title The Haunted House. And so that puts me in a position where I have to make something. So that's probably, you know, the answer to that question. If it is.
That's a great. Yeah, no, that's a great answer. That's a great answer. So let me I've got a couple of things that I want to bounce off, but the first one is
Sure.
Incredibly successful. You have the skills that a lot of magicians wish they had, which is, you know, you've got a grounding in theatrical. Well, you've got you've got a lot of grounding in theatre and stand-up comedy, improv. Plus, you've immersed yourself in business. You have the skills that most magicians wish they only had.
Just amazing. You're amazing.
I'm in awe of you, to be honest, David. You go up to here and you absolutely kill it. My question is twofold. One, and it might be different reasons, it might be the same reason, but one, when you're doing so well, what has made you decide to want to kind of go back into close-up magic? Because that's the exact opposite to what a lot of people want. The amount of people that I speak to, they go, I do close-up, but I'm putting a stage up one day.
Yeah.
I want to be on stage. You know, and here's you're selling out shows at the Fringe, making a lot of money. You've got your own show that you get booked outside of the Fringe all of the time to go and do. And you're like, well, now I want to see how I can make that work in close-up. What is the reasoning behind that? I've got another question, but I want to focus on that first of all. What's the reasoning behind kind of doing? I've done about 300 interviews on this channel, and I've never heard anyone say that. I've never heard it. I hear a lot of people go, I do stage. I'd never go back to close-up in a million years. I find it interesting, especially as I do a lot of stage work, but I love close-up. I'm never going to stop doing close-up because I really enjoy doing that as well.
Sure.
You know, I'd be interested to see your
No, it's a valid question. It's an absolutely valid question. So I think there are two answers. One, commercial. Stage is good, but there's absolutely no question that if you are a professional magician, you can make certainly more conveniently a lot of money doing close-up magic, because the opportunities there are like, I mean, for a start, I am limited to a performance space. If I am in I could hire out a village hall and do a show. Sure, no one's going to turn up. What I need to do is I need to find a space that has prestige, a theatre that is already an inbuilt audience, and then I give that audience a product that I know they would watch, right? And that's going great, and I'm loving that, and I'm beyond thrilled that that is a big part of my life and living, right? But it is still limited. Like the build is slow, and it's going great, but like it's still, the build is slow. Whereas over the last sort of year, really, truth be told, what actually happened was I had some friends that I made who were magicians, who were local to where I lived. I just started, putting the word out a bit, just making friends with a few people, and they were close-up magicians who were kind of just starting out, mostly. I hadn't been doing it too long, and I was kind of talking about them. I was talking to them about what I used to do to get gigs close-up wise. And then I started kind of doing it for them, with them a bit. And as I was doing it, I was kind of looking and going, oh man, I forgot this. Like I forgot about this business model, and I kind of just ignored it for a very, very long time. But it's really lucrative. Like it has a way more commercial aspect to it, conveniently, than stage. It's one thing if you're Darren Brown and you can sell out a 1,300 seat theatre without thinking about it. I'm selling out 90 seaters. I'm selling out, around that, I think is fair to say. Which, don't get me wrong, when I'm the only guy on stage, is fine. But I'm not doing that every night of the week. I'm doing that for sort of a run here and there. The Edinburgh Fringe Festival, and I'll do like little extended runs of periods. Whereas like most of the time I'm spending writing the shows, like developing the material. And I was just thinking to myself, man, like what, and honestly, genuinely, I asked myself this question. This was the crux of it. Once I started to just look and go, oh yeah, there's this market. I was like, right, I quit close-up magic because I got to the stage where I hated it. And the reason I hated it was partially, well, in big part because of ego. Like I was walking up to people in a restaurant trying to convince them that they wanted to see a magic trick, when a week ago I had 100 people who turned up to see me, who have been coming to see me for years, going, oh my God, you're amazing. And then I was struggling with that. I was like, man, this feels, I'm struggling with this feeling, and I'd be lying if I didn't say it was anything other than ego, like if I was above that, but I'm not. Like I'm not. And I was like, okay, well, if I went back into that, what would I need to do? Like, what would I need to do in order to make that so I didn't want to quit? So I actually cared. And I'd say the answer was twofold. One would be I'd have to be charging X amount of money. And I know what that number is now. You know what I mean? Versus what I used to charge, which was kind of like, what I close-up magic kind of thing. Whereas now I'm like, well, I've got a pretty damn good CV now. Like, what would be, and I've got a niche product. What is the amount of money I would have to charge? So if I'm not getting gigs for that amount, I'm just not going to do those gigs because they're not worth my time. The second thing was, can I make it congruent with what I'm doing? So I'm definitely carving myself a space in this like horror, like theatrical narrative element, like I'm finding this space. I don't want to give that position up. I want to double down on that. I don't want to be like, oh, and I'm also doing card tricks and sponge balls, right? Even though currently what I'm working on is how do I make card tricks and sponge balls congruent with that? Because that's really, really strong magic. Really strong magic. Like, what does a sponge ball routine look like with this guy doing it? Like, it's got to look different, right? It definitely, for a start, it can't use, but anyway, blah, blah, blah. But, and I'm really getting addicted to answering those questions, and I'm building it, and I'm like, okay, I'm getting close. I'm getting closer to, and the Oracle Bar in Liverpool has really afforded me an opportunity to, because the atmosphere is incredibly, I mean, it's unlike everyone who goes to that bar is going to see close-up magicians perform. So I don't have to go through the barrier of, hey, who's this guy? I just walk up to the table and they're like, yeah, come sit down. This is what we're here for. So that afforded me a bit of like, okay, I can, mess about a bit. And it's funny, the first night I was back there, I was doing like some weird stuff, man. Like I was doing some weird stuff. And it was fine. And I was getting some reactions and it was all right. And then on the last table at midnight, I picked up a deck of cards. I'd not done a single card trick all night. And I was like, I'm just going to mix it up. And I just killed. Like, I just went back into this old version of me and was tearing it up. And I was like, oh man, like, I need to do that in this form. I can't, because it's easy for the pendulum to swing the whole way and go, oh, I need to just be weird. No, I need to be very, very, very good. I need to be as good, better than every other magician who's doing a table, than every other magician who's doing the Omni deck. You know, like I need to be better than that or as good as that, but within my like niche, within my space. So that's the addiction is answering those questions. So I'd say the reason I'm going back to close-up magic is significantly because I understand it's a very commercial market that I have not been exploring for a while, and the other is because I've got a newly found artistic interest in that art form. So there you go.
That's correct. And would it ever take over completely? So let's say, for argument's sake, in 2 years' time, you're given a dream contract doing close-up magic in a venue you love at a price you're very, very happy with, but it takes place at exactly the same time as the Fringe, which you've been doing for the last 14 years. Would it get to a point where you kind of like, well, you know what? Let's put a pin in the Fringe this year because I'm having so much fun doing this. This is probably an easier way to make money. Yeah, like you said, you know, I can only imagine how hard it is to do 3 shows a day and market it and get the shows in through the door. You know, would you ever kind of stop doing the Fringe?
I've got 2 answers to that. So one would be that I think it's unlikely for the amount of money that I would want that anyone could offer me a contract as lucrative as that. The other thing, though, is that if hypothetically that did happen and the contract made it more convenient to see my family, I've got a wife, I've got a son, and I didn't have to go away for 3 weeks, I'd consider that element of it. Like if it, you know, there's also the potential of me just doing a week at the Edinburgh Fringe. I would never give up stage. Like I'd still do theatres. I might not do the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, but I'd still just go to theatres because close-up's great. It doesn't feel anything like being on stage. You know, like, oh, have we frozen? Oh yeah. Like Darren has talked about, you know, sure. Darren does TV to fill theatres because theatres is amazing. Like actors who are massive, huge name actors still do theatre. That is not to make money. They make a lot more money doing movies. It's because theatre is as much an experience for me, if not more so, than it is for the rest of the audience. So I will never ever give up theatre. Like that is where my heart is. But yeah, I think that
Okay, that's a great answer. Now I have got what I mentioned earlier when I was talking about close-up. I had 2 questions. I have got another question. Similar sort of thing. You've been very, very successful at what you've done up until this point.
Sure.
And we talked
up until this point.
Well,
it's all downhill now.
It's all downhill from here. No, but what I mean is, a couple of years ago, you obviously started creating magic. I mean, as a performer and putting your own shows together, you've been creating magic since day one. But you released the trick commercially through the 1914, the Nightmare page. So, what made you decide to go down that side of things? Because that is a completely different thing to everything else that you're doing. And in fact, a lot of people that I know that do their own shows, they're kind of like, I will never, this is my material. This is what I use in my show. I don't want people to have this. What made you decide to kind of go down that route with this particular product? And is that something you want to do more of in the future?
Great question. So let's put a caveat immediately and say money. Because
nothing wrong with that.
This is what I do for a living. Like multiple revenue streams makes a lot of sense if you're self-employed. Flip side of that is, and let's just be brutally honest. So again, I'm going to talk about my ego and my problem with it. There is no hierarchy when it comes to the title magician. If someone tells you they're a doctor, you're like, okay, I understand what that means. If someone says, I'm a doctor with a double first specialty in infectious diseases, you'd be like, okay, that's even more impressive, Dr. House. You know, like, you get it. If I'm like, I'm a magician, it's like, what does that mean? Now, in the magic community, which are like, there's a solid argument that they are my peers, right? Like, I also consider my peers to be other theatrical artists in different forms, sure, but like magicians. Like I've been to one magic convention ever. Actually, that's a lie. I went to two. I went to Doomsday, which is a bizarre magic convention because I was lecturing. But the other one I went to was the session, the Vanishing Ink session. I went once, and I saw a lot of people who I considered, you know, sort of my professional heroes. Like my dad bought me Roberto Giobbi's Card College when I was a kid, and stuff like that. And you know, Max Maven was there, and I went up to say hi to these people, and they didn't give a shit about me. And I was like, well, that makes sense. I get why, right? And it seems weird if I just go up to you and go, oh, dude, like, I'm actually pretty good at this. Like, I get where you're at. Like, and I realized, man, unless I release magic tricks to the community, no one is going to care about me, which I'm not saying I need them to care about me, but like, I'd like to. I'm a bit sad. I was genuinely a bit emotional when Max Maven died, as a person who does not know him at all, right?
Yeah.
But I really respected what he did as an artist, and I think he sometimes is a bit unfairly looked upon, certainly for a while. Like, whereas like if you look at like his like TV shows and stuff, and like his like mind games, he was doing mad stuff, and I hugely respect that. And I'm sad that I never got to be friends with him, despite the fact that I was in the same like space as him for a while. Almost certainly because he was surrounded by a few hundred people, all of whom were trying to get his attention. And there was no way for me to stand out in a crowd, even though when I'm in the Edinburgh Fringe, I stand out a bit more because people can come and see any other guy's show and see mine and compare like for like. And I'm like, yeah, like I want to be respected on my merit as an artist. And given that, I think releasing magic to the community seems like the most convenient way to do that. I hope this doesn't make me sound like a total asshole. But like, there you go. Like, yeah. And also D. Christopher, who ran the 1914, called me up to ask advice about the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, truthfully. And then when he did that, I was like, oh, I've got some things. Do you want to have a look at them? Because I know you've got this thing, the 1914. And he looked at Nightmare Page and said, which I'd done 1 year at the Edinburgh Fringe. And I probably wasn't. I mean, to be fair, actually, no, I was doing it. Like, I was doing that effect for a while. And like, I did it because I think, actually, one little thing I want to mention if we're talking about releasing magic, because I thought you might ask me this, and you're like the king of that, is I think sometimes one of the problems with commercial, like the commercial space of magic, or the market of magic, right, is that in order to sell stuff, one of the things that is like, and again, I am not like, I'm just being honest about this, like from my perspective. People might have a different opinion, and that's bloody valid, right? But sometimes effects are marketed in such a way where they're like, this is the next level thing. And everyone's going to be doing this. And you definitely want this for your professional repertoire, right? Mm-hmm. Despite the fact that everyone knows, especially people who release magic, the vast majority of people who purchase magic are amateurs and hobbyists, right? I am still a hobbyist when it comes to some elements of magic. I love self-working card tricks. I don't perform a lot of them professionally. I do one professionally, but like that's my hobby that still exists within magic. I just find that whole space fascinating. I think like there are some effects that I create that I will never perform professionally because they don't fit into where I exist as a performer. They don't work on stage, right? Because maybe they're not strong enough or they're not as strong as something else I can do. But if I was a kid at 14, 15, and I owned the trick I've made, I would love it, right? And I think it's unfair, or like, I think it's fair. A better way to say that would be to say, I think there is a valid space for those effects. And so sometimes it's frustrating that, you know, and I think sometimes with the Nightmare Page, this was a little bit the case, where sometimes things are marketed in a way that implies like, hey, this is going to change your life. And I'm like, well, it's not. But it's a cool trick and it's kind of clever. And I think like that's a valid reason to exist, you know? Like, I'm not saying you're going to close your show with it. You might even not want to put it in your closed up set, but you're going to like it for what it is. Or like, I hope you do. You know what I mean? I mean, fair play if you're exclusively buying magic to perform it and you're a professional, like I am. That actually sometimes makes it difficult to navigate that market. You know what I mean? When every trick is like, oh my God, you know? So I've got stuff. I know Tom showed you one of the things that I like have that I've not sold, the palm reader card. And I'm
I told him
fascinated
it's
with
incredible. It's amazing.
oh,
I thought it
thank
was
you.
great.
I love you. You would say that. Like
No, I
I
kind of got a reputation for saying what I think.
oh, that is fair. That is fair, actually. That is fair. Yeah, don't rant about it. But I no, but like I love the binary principle, and I'm fascinated with it. It is not something I'm going to consistently perform, not because the trick isn't awesome, just because you know. And so yeah, like I think the releasing magic does intimidate me, but I want to do it partially because I would like people to see who I am and what I do. And I think honestly, that's as good an angle. Like if someone buys a trick and likes it, they might look at my other stuff and go, "Oh, you know." And the TED talk would be the obvious thing to link to after that. That I did segue. But yeah, so there you go. There's the releasing magic thing.
So, with regards to that side of things, would are you planning to do a lecture at some point in the future? Is lecturing something you want to do? And also, when you think about getting well known in the community, you said yourself up until a few years ago you didn't really hang around magicians. Would you ever consider like entering a competition, for example, a magic competition, or is that something that is not kind of on your radar?
Sure. Well, obviously, Britain's Got Talent has been asking me, and has asked a lot of fringe magicians, to be doing that show for years. And every year I tell them to, sod off, because like that shouldn't exist really. Like, Penn and Teller's Fool Us, there's a lovely show where they're like, hey, come on, show us your stuff. We've got this like framework of you've got to try and fool us, which even we acknowledge is stupid, but we have to do it because that's the marketing angle of this show. But at the end of the day, we're just going to be really nice to you and let an artist do their bit, as opposed to a show where afterwards I'm supposed to stand there while Simon Cowell, who is not someone who I artistically respect, says things about me. Like, it blows my mind that people can stand there. I couldn't do that. Like, I couldn't. My general rule is, would David Bowie have done that? Like, if the answer is yes, fair game. If it's no, I think artistically it's not worth thinking about. With regards to magic competitions, though, funnily enough, I have considered it softly, just like kind of in the back of my mind, just going, well, could I do a magic competition? But I do have a little bit of a thing where I'm like, I don't think competition. I think like I generally am a bit against the idea of winning and losing as a sort of framework for anything, and because it's kind of stupid. Like my kid's 5 years old and he gets quite sad. He's autistic and he gets quite sad at the idea of when he loses. And I'm like, yeah, me too. It's point. And people say stuff like, oh, winning and losing is a part of life. Is it? Like, unless you're a professional athlete, I can't see like you doing one thing and that person doing it, you deciding that you're losing is you. Like, there's no obvious framework for a loss and a win. There is purely your perception, right? And like,
Yeah.
If I entered a competition and I didn't win, I'd be a bit like, oh. And I'm like, I don't want to feel like that. It's fair play if it was like, oh, here, we're just going to have 5 acts on that have been picked. I'm like, okay, sure, that sounds fun. That sounds great. But the idea of winning or losing something, I'm not really into that.
I'm with you. That's absolutely fine. What about the lecturing though? Like you've got so much knowledge to share. A lecture that you put together that would be, you could approach a lecture in a very different way to a lot of other people, especially with your experience on stage and theatrically.
Sure. I appreciate that. And I've done sort of one lecture, which was within the last year, actually, at Bristol Magic Society, because the guy had seen me perform at Edinburgh, David Hoare, and he booked me to do a theatre show and sort of paid for my show and was like, hey, while you're doing it, come and lecture, a bit more money. And I was like, oh no, I don't know what to do. And then I lectured, and the response was strong, which was good because I was really, really intimidated. By that, honestly. I'd like to do it again. I enjoyed it. I don't know how to break into that. Like, I think I emailed 2 or 3 people after, just from Magic Society, like the Magic Society in Newcastle or something, because my parents live there and I visit home, and I was like, oh, that's one that I'm aware of, and they never replied to me, which is fair because I'm no one to them because I've not release 10 things. You know what I mean? So I'm not against lecturing 100%. I just have absolutely no way to break into the market. Maybe this will help, Craig. So thanks for talking.
I think it might do. I think it might do. I think it definitely might do. That's great. And you mentioned, I want to circle back to something that you mentioned at the very beginning, um, which is you talked about being on TV, and you
Oh
kind of just
yeah.
casually put it out there. Can you elaborate more on that? Because that's kind of the holy grail for most magicians, isn't it?
I
If
mean,
I
yeah,
do on TV, that's the thing, and you're just like, oh yeah, I got a chance to be on TV. I've had, it's you dropped it out quite
sure,
just.
sure. So I have had a serious go at trying to have a TV show for many years. I've not been doing that for the last 3 or 4 years, the last 2 or 3, 4 years. But there was a period there for a few years where I was working with a good friend of mine who is like keyed into that world, and that's what he does professionally. And he's also very into the magic world. And we were both having a very serious go at pitching a TV show. And we had meetings and stuff, but it never transpired, as these things don't often do. But apart from that, like what happened was I was in Liverpool, and Liverpool Football Club has its own TV channel, which obviously you only watch if you're a Liverpool Football Club supporter. And we made an hour-long TV special for that channel, which like I'm sure very few people saw. But it was, it was to all the Liverpool football players. So what was funny, I don't follow football, but like I did have some like family and stuff who support Liverpool, who were like, oh my God, like, like I didn't know these guys and I'm doing magic tricks to them. And people were like, dude, like what they did that made me pay attention though was they're like, do you know how much money that guy makes a week? And then like that blew my mind of like how different we are. But but they were lovely people, and it was a lovely experience, and I learned a lot. I'm glad I did it, and I'm glad that very few people ever saw it because it definitely taught me how to do that. And to be totally honest, like TV massively intimidates me. I'd love to do it because of the exposure. Like, let's not pretend that that's not the value of it, right? But the exposure needs to be good exposure. If you go on TV now and you just do some magic tricks, what's the point? Why bother? Unless you're maybe crazy attractive or crazy funny or you look different than everyone else looks, Um, or you're reinventing the genre like Darren bloody did. Like, you're gonna struggle. So don't get me wrong, like the idea of TV is an appealing one, but the idea of content is very difficult. And I will not do TV if I am not going to do something very special with it. And I can't tell you what that is, honestly, yet. But yeah. So yeah, I did like Liverpool Football Club TV thing. They just saw me performing on the street, the guy who runs it. A lucky situation, and I got myself into it. And like, yeah, the stuff I was doing was just I was just doing like some mentalism, no special. Um, yeah, that, like in terms of more mainstream exposure, though, the TEDx talk I did was definitely a much stronger product. Like in terms of like something that has opened doors for me, I would say that I spent a huge amount of time making that good because I was lucky that that particular organization I went with made very high quality products, and I knew, okay, if I'm going to be on stage, and like they did it at a venue that was like 1,000, like actually no, the venue's probably like 3 to 4 thousand or something, but like it had about 1,000 people in, and I was like, right, if I make this really good, and I feel like I did, and that was very high. That's like a 12-minute, very very well produced. I mean, it's a YouTube video, but that's what TV is now, right? And I didn't do a single magic trick. Like I'm not gonna do a TED
I was
talk
going to
and do
say,
magic.
I've seen a lot of magicians do TED talks and TEDx talks, and a lot of the time it's based around magic, or
Sure.
there's some sort of overarching sort of plot in terms of what they're going to be talking about, which is kind of a thinly veiled excuse to come and to come and do magic tricks, but
Yes.
with something that justifies doing a 12-minute show. Like I mean, obviously people can go and watch it on YouTube, I imagine, but
Sure. Yeah.
like
And
what
please do.
this is
That's
a
the
big
thing I
deal.
want to take away from this.
I'm definitely going to watch
Um,
it. I'm very
oh,
interested in
please
it.
do.
What was your approach to putting a TEDx talk together like that? Like you said, you did no match. Did you own the fact that you're a
Yes.
performer? Did you lean into that? Can we talk a little bit about that for a couple of minutes? Would that be okay?
Man, I'd love to. I would say, in terms of like a produced piece of work, that is something I'm incredibly proud of, and I spent a massive amount of time. So, as it happened, they got in touch with me after seeing an Edinburgh Fringe show just before the pandemic. And then that forced me to have years to prep for that. And I just made sure to stay in touch with them. I kept emailing them every 6 months. I made sure they didn't forget me. And then I was lucky because the organization that did that particular talk in Newcastle, TEDx Newcastle, was run by a guy who was an American who had ran an organization that had copied TED's business model for many years before TED franchised TEDx. So he understood what he was doing. And he booked a really good venue, had a very, very good film crew. And I was aware of this when they asked me. Like, I researched it, and I was like, right, don't mess this opportunity up. So immediately I thought, okay, what am I gonna talk about? I need a title that's kind of catchy. I ended up going with Why Magic Should Frighten You, which isn't bad, isn't great, but it's as good as I could create for what I knew the content I was going to make would be. I looked at every other magician who'd done a TED talk, and I thought, right, well, and also just good TED talks. Like, I'm not just going to copy magicians. That's like not necessarily a good pool of data. And so I focused on what, and it all came back to the same thing, storytelling. I was like, okay, cool, let's do that. That's great. Definitely don't perform a magic trick, because magic isn't as good on TV as it is live. This is true for most art forms, really, but magic really falls into that, unless you're doing pre-show stuff. You know what I mean? Like stuff the camera can't see. And I would not have that advantage doing the TED talk. I mean, I probably could have done that, I suppose, but like, sod that. I'm not a performing monkey. I'm going on TED to share an idea. That is what their organization's about. I'm not going on TED. It actually really upset me when I saw Darren Brown's talk and realized his was also that. And I get it. He was about to do the breakout show in America and he needed to advertise the Broadway stuff. But I was a little bit like, man, I really respect you as an artist. And David Blaine's TED talk is the best magician TED talk that exists, because he doesn't talk about a bloody magic trick. He talks about all these stunts he's done, and it's emotionally and it's very, very powerful. And I was like, okay, cool. So I thought about, I was the only guy out of all of the other people who were doing that thing to go and speak to the technicians, the lighting desk, the sound people, because I was like, I want to make mine look different to everyone else's. So I just decided on something very simple. I had a chair, and we intentionally did the light so a significant amount of me was in shadow. And that alone made the vibe, I did the whole thing sitting down. I memorized a 12-minute script that I wrote. I didn't read it off an auto cue, which was bloody terrifying. There was one bit where I forgot the script and they cut it out, actually, a sort of 10-second bit where I blanked. And it was because I said something that I didn't realize would get a massive laugh, and the laugh threw me. But then I did talk, and yes, I'm very proud of the content there. I could go into what the content is, but there's no point. Watch it. I feel like it's a reasonable point. The Cliff Notes version would be to say that every other art form, the reason it's good is because it tells a story. Magic mostly doesn't. Why not? Like, what's the reason? Like, acting tells a story, dance tells a story, music tells a story, novels tell a story. Pick any other art form. Like, the reason those mediums exist is because they focus heavily on narrative. Magic has narrative, but not like, you could go, the best example I've got that I don't use in the TED Talk is, you could go on YouTube right now and watch a compilation clip of Jackie Chan doing his stunts and fight scenes. And it's awesome, and it's amazing. Not as good as watching one of his movies. And it's because it makes you care about that scene. You know what I mean? Like, it makes you care. I remember when that Daredevil TV show came out, and in like whatever episode it was, there's this incredible one-take fight scene, and it's amazing. And a mate of mine came up to me after, a year later, and was like, "Yeah, I watched that scene on YouTube, and everyone bigged it up, and I didn't think it was that good." I was like, "Mate, watch the show. The reason it's good is because you understand the stakes, you understand the context, and action scenes, jump scare horror scenes, all of those are exactly the same as a magic trick. It's a mechanical process designed to invoke a specific emotional reaction, right? That's all a magic trick is. If you put narrative on the top of that, in other words, stakes, obstacles, a goal, people give so much more of a shit, that's what I've been doing in theatre for the last few years. That's what I'm keen to try and bring to closer. I'm not sure how, but I'm gonna.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. Wow. I'm going to link down below just for people watching this. I'm going to link down below. If you send me the YouTube link, we'll put that down below there so you can click straight in the description and you can get that. Brilliant. I've got one last question for you.
Appreciate it.
Dave, one final question, which is, you're obviously a very ambitious person. You've obviously got goals and you've obviously got aspirations. And you've achieved, like I said, we've talked about, you've achieved an awful lot. What is left on your magical bucket list, and maybe even your non-magical bucket list? What is left that you really would like to achieve? Because you've said you're mid-30s, you've still got a lot of gas left in the tank and then some. What you've achieved by the age that you are at is phenomenal, frankly. If you could take a snapshot of where your career is right now and then say to most magicians, this is what you will have accomplished by the time your career ends, Edinburgh Fringe, creating and releasing magic, everything, TEDx, everything that you've done. People, there's a lot of magicians that would go, yeah, I'll have that. That'd be great. That would be good. But you're, only just getting started, really. So what can we expect? What are you wanting to achieve moving forward?
Great question. So just before the interview ends, and I don't have an opportunity to say this, let me just say how much I really respect what you have done with what you're doing. Now, I'm aware, because we have a mutual friend, of your business acumen outside of this YouTube thing, right? But what you're doing with the YouTube thing is bloody smart, and you've done it very well. So well done, you. I just wanted to take a moment to say I am privileged to be talking to you, and I think what you've done is very clever. It's all right, yeah. So a few years ago, sort of about 2017 or something, just 2018, just before I wrote a show called Actual Magic, which was talking about, the narrative within that show was regarding, sounds like daft when you say it, but like it was about like my relationship with my grandfather once he got Alzheimer's disease, which, sounds like every other kind of like it. I'm not gonna, like I was very proud of that show, and it had the impact that I wanted it to have. And it's sad that like when I mention the topic, I feel like everyone's going to assume that sounds kind of bad, doesn't it? And it's like, well, it kind of does, because you never see people do it well. But if you do it well, it's the way to do it. Anyway, before I'd done that, I was doing very commercial magic shows, right? Stand-up comedy magic shows. I decided I wasn't going to do Britain's Got Talent because I felt like that wasn't an angle for me. And I was looking around and I felt like, and I, ego to the wind, I was looking at all the other magicians and I was going, everyone's doing stuff kind of similar to what I do. They're standing on stage, they're being funny, they're doing magic tricks. But I feel like I'm doing it better. I really, truly feel like I am. I'm not learning a single thing from watching any of these other magicians. And I was like, I'm at the top of this hill. How am I not better, more famous, more successful, more anything that I am right now? And it was a depressing feeling, right? Mm. And then I had a revelation that came through, multiple channels, seeing some friends of mine perform, seeing who were doing interesting things, seeing, Bo Burnham was a big part of that. Like, I appreciate he had a big effect on a lot of artists. And then all of a sudden, it was like something opened in my brain, or better yet, a way to phrase it would be, I was blind and suddenly I could see, right? I was at the top of a hill, and that hill was at the base of a mountain. And that feeling was so like I emancipating. Like I felt free. I felt like I got a direction, So in answer to the question, where would I like to be? I don't know what it looks like from the top of that mountain, and I never will. But as I discover a new view every higher I get, that's where I want to be. I want to be climbing. I've no idea where that's going to go. Absolutely no idea. But that's where I want to be, still on the mountain, going upwards.
That is, I've asked this question to a lot of people, and I'm not just saying that. That is possibly one of the best answers that I've ever heard to that question, ever. That is.
Oh, I love you.
Yeah, no, it's true. It sums up your approach to business, to performance. It really does. It says a lot about you, the answer to that question. That's amazing. It really is. It really is. Very, 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 very good.
Well, thanks.
Yeah, genuinely, I said at the beginning that I was excited about doing this interview, and I really meant that, because I didn't really know much about you, but as the interview's gone on, the more I've got to know, the more impressed I am, both with you as a person and with as everything that you've achieved. it's phenomenal. And I'm so glad our mutual friend said, hey,
Yeah.
we need to connect, guys, because this has been one of my favorite interviews that I've done. Genuinely, this has been, and if people have actually been listening to what you've been saying, then you have basically given people a blueprint to actually be able to do more, whether that be, go onto stage, improve their business, everything that you've talked about. If you read between the lines, if you go back and you watch this interview again, you can see there's a lot of golden nuggets in what David was saying that you might not have even picked up on the first time. And I want to say thank you. Seriously, thank you for sharing so freely and coming on the channel.
Thank you very much. I've had an absolutely amazing time. Just because we should, our mutual friend is Tom Maloney, and he's the best dude ever. I love you, Tom.
Thomas is amazing. Thomas is fantastic.
He's a great guy.
A long time. And he's one of those people that would help anybody. Selflessly as well. He'll help anybody selflessly, not wanting to get anything out of it in return, just because he thinks that's the right thing to do. And
I know, what a fool.
Yeah, he's an idiot, but long may that continue. But
great. Now, it's genuine pleasure talking to you.
Yeah, you're going to see him a little bit. So I want to say, David, thank you so much. Now, I want everybody who's watching this to do me a favor, a couple of favors, 3 favors. Number 1, leave a comment down below. I'm sure David will see it and read it. So leave a comment down below. Let me know. Yeah. Second of all, if you find yourself in Edinburgh and you want to go and check out a very cool show, then go look for David's show, because he's there every year. He's been there for 14 years. He's not going to skip a year. So if you want to see a really cool show and you want to support it, be a way to do it. And then finally, if you are a member of a Magic Society, or you are somebody who organizes a convention, you want somebody who's fresh on the lecture circuit. And that's what we're all looking for, somebody fresh. You don't want to see an old fart like me that's been doing it for years. If you want to see somebody fresh on the lecture circuit that's approaching things in a completely different way, you heard it. David wants to do more lectures, and he doesn't know how to break into it. We can help him. Let your society know. Let your organizing committee of the convention know, and hit David up. What's the best way for people to contact you, David?
How about I put my contact details in the comments?
Brilliant. That's a good idea. You put your contact details into the comments, and then if anybody would like to know where you're going to be, to see a show, or how they can book you for a lecture, that will be how to do it. But David, one more time, thank you so much, my friend. Thank you for coming on Magic TV. Really appreciate it. You're amazing.
So much. Thank you.
No problem, guys. On behalf of Dave, thank you so much for coming on the channel. I will be back next Saturday with another Talk Magic. Remember, I'm back on Sunday with a Q&A, so make sure you check that out. I'll see you again soon. My name's Craig, and this is Magic TV.